Hi, I'm Brent Stafford, and this is RegWatch by RegulatorWatch.com. Nicotine-free vapes. At first glance, they sound like the answer to many of public health's concerns over vaping. No tobacco and no nicotine. One would think that after all of the harping, shaming, and demonization of nicotine, that tobacco control and public health would embrace nicotine-free vapes. But after nearly 8 years in business, the experience of one American company suggests that might not be the case. Joining us today to discuss the unique challenges facing nicotine-free vaping is Conrad Kurth, founder and owner of Cyclone Pods, one of the first companies in the United States dedicated exclusively to nicotine-free vaping products. Conrad, thanks for joining us today on RegWatch.
Thank you so much, Brent.
So Conrad, I'm not quite sure where to start because for me, and I suspect for many of our viewers, vaping without nicotine is almost incomprehensible. Why would anyone want to start a nicotine-free vape company?
Yeah, it's a great question and one I get quite often, frankly. And over the years, I've gotten less and less of the why, and more people get it. So typically, people will gear or look towards nicotine-free vaping when they're either looking to reduce their usage, stop vaping completely, or just looking to have something at a social setting where some of their friends are vaping nicotine and just want to, not use a nicotine-based device.
So how did you get started with this idea?
Yeah, so as you said earlier, it started about almost 8 years ago in August. And, naively, I didn't really know much about vaping. And at the time, Juul was a big hit. Juul was everywhere. A lot of my friends had the device, the mango Juul pods were there. It was delicious flavor, mint. I saw more and more of my friends utilizing this Juul device. And, naively, I thought, the purpose of the Juul was to help people quit smoking and, just stop altogether. And of course, that was not the case. It was just getting hooked on another device, which is fine. But, I thought like, well, is there any like nicotine-free option? Is there something out there that is truly what I thought was attacking the problem to help people have a choice to try to quit, however many years of cigarette smoking that they were doing. And there wasn't. And so I thought of making a nicotine-free vaping company. And, maybe that was silly in the moment and I was, not making the right choice, but I went ahead and did it and have, continued to grow that vision.
So based on what you thought then, you felt that Juul was targeting people not to help them quit smoking, but to...
No, I mean, not necessarily like target. It just, I was 27, 26, maybe, not understanding the full purpose of it. But, the Juul is a great device and has helped so many people transition from cigarettes, which is an amazing, amazing thing. I just thought, for those people that, truly wanted to quit altogether, there wasn't a good tool or something out there to facilitate that. And that's really the specific issue that I wanted to go after. It wasn't, oh, Juul's doing a horrible thing. It was just, I really wanted to go after that.
So it wasn't an ideological or some moral
No,
basis
no,
against
no.
nicotine?
Nothing like that at all. It was purely seeing what I thought was a problem space that wasn't being looked at by others.
Okay, we just held on to a bunch of viewers that, might have been dumping off. So you're not anti-nicotine?
No, not at all. No.
So it was 2018, I believe, was around the time that you did this. I mean, boy, was it just simply you thought that it was a good business opportunity, that kind of thing?
No, I really focused on, wanting to help people and give people choices and option. The business, it was never really like, oh, I wanted to make a ton of money. It was just more, I saw an opportunity to do something, and I've always enjoyed building and creating. And, I was like, okay, I want to try this. I want to do this as like, a challenge to myself to get something together and see if it's even possible. And it was, just the excitement of creation and putting something out there and learning a bunch that I didn't know was really the allure to starting this business and going for it. And I've been learning a lot, still learning every day. So it's been a great journey.
So that was in 2018 and pretty much 2019, or you're just starting. And we had the epidemic of teen vaping, and then we had this so-called vaping-related lung illness, EVALI, which just triggered, the world. What was it like to be starting a nicotine-free vape company and products at that time?
Yeah, that was it was hard, I mean, because there's definitely like social stigma when, that happened of like, oh, like why are you doing this? And having to explain that, it really wasn't like the vapes that were doing this. It was a lot of these illegal THC cartridges that were putting in diactyl, vitamin E acetate, a bunch of really bad caustic chemicals into these devices. And so, obviously within my friend group and circle, we, I kind of explained what was going on. But as an industry as a whole, yeah, it was difficult. That's a time, the company took a big hit, sales were greatly down, trying to survive really. It was tough. And just like all the stigma that went along with vaping when, they're trying to make it seem like vaping is far worse than cigarettes when, it's not at all. It's a much, much better alternative for consumers than, traditional cigarette.
I know you mentioned a little bit of this already, Conrad, but tell us more about your target customer.
Yeah, so that's another thing I get a lot, and whenever I talk to PR companies and marketing companies, whoever, they're always like, "Well, who are you going after?" And I always have the same answer. It really is everyone. Everyone has. I have women that are 65 years old. I have a freshly minted 21-year-old that says that they started vaping at 14, or using cigarettes at like 12, and everyone in the middle, all sorts of all walks of life, all demographics, and people that are looking to, stop vaping, stop smoking, and, try to finally quit.
So the company is based in California, correct?
That is correct, yes.
So California has not been the most open to vaping. Do they discern the difference with the fact that you're nicotine free?
Sadly, they do not. No. So California, amongst a growing number of states, has increasingly put very harsh legislation, not only against nicotine vaping, but also nicotine-free vaping. They've built these laws in a method where they're very vague in terms of their enforcement. So it's like any apparatus that can be reasonably consumed through inhalation, and you could just about hit all sorts of stuff with that. So it really gives the states a lot of power to enforce in an arbitrary sense what they want, which in my opinion is not a great use of legislative power. And I've heard many horror stories of very operating very legally, and they just get their goods seized just because the police that day wanted to come in and take their stuff or not know the difference between products. So it's really has become quite tough uh, in that sense.
We're talking about California. They've got a flavor ban there, but I notice you still sell flavors.
Yes, we sell our flavors out of state and other jurisdictions where they are legal. We are building a new SKU at the moment where we will be within their flavor compliance. And it is a, pipe dream that we could go to the state and be like, listen, we get our stuff lab tested. We verify there's no nicotine. It's unreasonable that someone could put nicotine in these devices. Will you allow us to sell this? Hopefully we can approach the state in by end of the year, if not next year, to see if that's a reasonable accommodation. But we'll see. But yeah, we are lumped in with the nicotine flavor ban, even though we have no nicotine.
That's crazy. I just think it's crazy.
Oh yeah, and we go above and beyond and demonstrate that we really do not have any nicotine in our devices or tobacco, synthetic, Nixidine, none of this stuff. We just get lumped in with everyone.
Your products look cool. They've got an adult aesthetic, I would say.
Thank you.
And you also have a pouch, a non-nicotine pouch. How does that work?
Yeah, so that's another interesting product line. And the reason I started it was one, I wanted something that gave me something that's totally unrelated to vaping at all, but does kind of tie back into the whole nicotine market. But it started out as like I needed something that provided really good focus, energy, and clarity for myself. So I kind of started dabbling around in, more nootropics and adaptogenic based ingredients. Found a good blend that I liked. And at the time, Zyn was really a big thing. And, Zyn it comes in a pouch format. And I was like, well, there's other nootropic adaptogenic products that come in, just a powder that you put in coffee or, something like that, or just like a seltzer. And I was like, well, what if I put this in a pouch format for people that, use Zins? Because I had tons of friends that used Zyn and like a coffee in the morning and got their day going. And so basically kind of made the pouch feel like a nicotine pouch, had a little bit of that bite, but just wasn't. And so that's how I kind of introduced like a different segment within our kind of nicotine alternative product line.
So they're caffeine pouches.
Yes, yeah. There's caffeine, there's lion's mane, cordyceps, bacopa monnieri, ashwagandha, reishi, and 50 milligrams of caffeine.
Conrad, there's a lot of smokers and vapors out there as potential customers, and certainly we've seen nicotine increasingly demonized. So it begs the question, how's business?
Yeah, it's a good question. When we first started out, I there was a big jump of sales. In 28 or I guess in 2019 going to 2020, the big vaping scare, that was a tough time. But by and large, through the years, we are growing very consistently, and in some cases quite rapidly in others. When I first started this, kind of like what you said about earlier, like who's using this? Like why? And, I alluded to that, the question came up a lot very early on when I was starting. But consistently more and more as I go to different trade shows, I talk to other distributors, customers, um, they're very quick to get it. I've had customers come by my booth at certain trade shows and they're like, oh, I don't get it at all. And it's like, that's fine. Just try one of these and let me know what you think. And they try it and they're like, oh my gosh, this is amazing. And then they convert and they like buy one on the spot. So, just kind of goes to show that more and more people are understanding it and the business is growing quite a bit.
So is one of the key things that's the draw is the hand to mouth thing that your product really addresses?
Yeah. And so I think, whether or not the FDA recognizes it, there is an oral fixation aspect to smoking, to vaping, people drinking coffee. There's a habit, that ritual that people truly enjoy. So yeah, that is the one of the aspects that our device will kind of, give people that oral fixation fix, but none of that addiction or none of the nicotine addiction while they're using it.
So I know you don't want to give away any company secrets, but over the years, are we talking hundreds of thousands of units sold or millions?
Definitely getting into the millions range for sure. Yeah.
Let me ask you, can a nicotine-free vape actually be an effective quit smoking or quit vaping tool?
Yeah, so this is one that, also you can't just go out and claim and say, hey, well, you can quit vaping, you can quit smoking, all this stuff. Because, the FDA, at least in terms of the US market, in order to be a smoking cessation device or a tool that you can use to quit smoking, you must undergo very rigorous studies costing millions and millions and millions of dollars to go and prove and submit to the FDA, and then 9 times out of 10 you're going to get shot down. Maybe probably even lower chances than that, if I'm going to be honest. So in terms of like an official standpoint, no, you cannot say that this is going to help you quit smoking. Now, anecdotally speaking, in what, I will just be parroting through people that have reached out to the company, have just told us through either direct emails or reviews. Like I was reading literally a review maybe 20 minutes or now 40, 30 or 40 minutes ago. A woman left a review. She's like, I've been smoking for 14 years, vaped for 15, and now I've been using these for 2 years and have not used nicotine since. So, there's been many stories, many comments like this, where people have used a nicotine-free device to, um, stop their nicotine usage, albeit they will vape a nicotine-free device every so often, or eventually they stop altogether. So, through that lens, anecdotally, you could say it is a successful, choice for people.
But you have to be careful about how you, as the company, message.
Oh yeah, yeah. We actually at one point we got a letter from I mean it was like some backwater part of the website. We got a letter from the FDA stating that we're making health claims, and it was like this one little backwater article stating like I don't even remember what it was. I could probably go find it. But it was a very silly like no one's ever gonna find it, and yeah, the FDA just comes down with an absolute hammer. Um, yeah, I understand their position, but at the same token, it's very frustrating that they put up so many roadblocks to a product that can, truly help a lot of people.
So a company that doesn't sell nicotine is bound by the same FDA restrictions as companies that do.
To an extent, to the extent that you can't just make health claims. However, federally, we are not by the FDA definition of a tobacco product or nicotine product. We are not bound by the same PMTA process that all the nicotine products are. However, on a state by state basis, as I spoke to a little bit earlier, they are really locking down on what their definition of a vape is to broaden to pretty much everything. So federally, we're not there yet, but state by state, it is becoming very hard, and there's even tighter restrictions than that in some states.
Well, the states are certainly very active, Wisconsin being one of them. Have you had any problems in that state?
Yeah, can't do it. We're toast. Everyone's toast, except for, funny enough, all the Altira companies. So
Because they have PMTAs?
because they are the only company except for one that just got recently approved. They're the only ones that have PMT exempt, and they're the classic big tobacco companies. There's no one small or even middle ground or even slightly above that has gotten an approved PMTA, except for the one that was just approved not too long ago in LA. But I actually don't know how large they are. But all the other ones have been like Reynolds and Altira companies.
So, how does it feel to be treated like you're peddling nicotine when the key core part of your program is to not have nicotine?
Yeah, it's very frustrating, especially when I do a lot of effort to, show lab data. I do regular testing on our products, to try to educate some of these health officials in these states when they're so blindly, just it doesn't matter, like you're a vape. When I, show through much effort to be like, we're like, sure you can classify it, but we're not nicotine. Like no one's getting addicted to this. Like I ensure that every batch that we have is a nicotine-free batch. And so, it's very frustrating when you're really trying to do something in my mind as positive within the industry, just get shut down so quickly by people that maybe not as well versed in the space.
So, you're being lumped in and found guilty by association.
Yes, quite so.
If you wanted to advertise for your products, are you able to do that unfettered?
No, no. Yeah, we can't do like Google ads. We've been able to do our pouches on Meta just because that's not a vaping product. Just because like we can't show a vaping product on YouTube, get taken down immediately. There's on Instagram you got to be careful. On TikTok, got to be very careful. So at least the pouches have been able to be run, but yeah, even a nicotine-free device. Although several years ago we were able to do a lot of the nicotine-free devices because we had a relationship with Meta, and because it was a nicotine-free device, they were okay with it. But more strict guidelines have come down, not just through Meta, but other companies just barring all vapes, regardless of any nicotine.
Well, and that brings up Shopify. They recently announced it would no longer support nicotine vape retailers. What does that decision mean for a company that doesn't sell nicotine?
Yeah, that was a super exciting exciting day. Um, you know, Basically what it means for myself and really everyone in the industry is that you got to get on Shopify. There's no way around it. There is I guess a possibility of me petitioning Shopify and being like, hey, we're not, with all this other data that I go to the States with and be like, hey, like check this out. There's probably a snowball's chance in hell that'll happen. But it's, it's worth a shot. You gotta take every shot you can. Um, but really what it means is, we have to move our e-commerce platform to a different system. So yeah, it's another getting lumped in with all the nicotine regulation and just getting caught by the crossfire.
Conrad, in 2021, Congress passed the PAC Act amendments, and the vape mail ban effectively shut nicotine vape products out of the U.S. Postal Service, with UPS, FedEx, and other carriers following suit. Did your nicotine-free products get caught up in that as well?
Yeah, yeah, we certainly did, and that was definitely a oh crap moment when that went down. And so, obviously, the first one we just stopped USPS, and basically we went to FedEx, UPS, and we're like, listen, here's all of our stuff. It's nicotine free. Like, are you okay with this? And granted, we're good with those carriers, and we're now working with some other carriers as well that are able to deliver our packages. There is a route in which you can use USPS that I think we'll look at later this year, but it's also one of those like the chances of it happening probably not going to happen. It's really not worth the effort, but if I have some time, I'll try just because I have a lot more data and historical precedents to be able to go to USPS and be like, hey, like, is this an agreeable thing to you? But I doubt it's going to go anywhere.
Conrad, what about tobacco control and public health? Have any of them embraced nicotine-free vaping as a potential off-ramp from nicotine?
To my knowledge, no. Now, that doesn't mean that there's probably some backwater article somewhere stating as such. But generally, any of these organizations are uh, very cautious about endorsing anything vaping. The one that I'm quite familiar with is the NHS study that they did in Britain, where they, looked at how much safer vapes were than cigarettes. Now, outside of that, I'm not familiar with other articles that have come out from major health organizations. Uh, but it really just kind of, I think, goes to show that for some reason, vaping has become radioactive. Whether that's a political thing or some other agenda or something is going on. Uh, but I think they're doing a great disservice by making it seem like vaping is, super radioactive. That's not to say that there aren't problems within the industry. There's not problems within the space. But I think, vaping itself is a much better alternative for people to go to from cigarettes. And I think that should be recognized at least. And, especially nicotine-free vaping, I think should be recognized as a potential avenue for people to, help themselves.
So if somebody was never a smoker or never a nicotine vapor, is there any real problem for them to buy your product and use it?
There's no problem, but I generally don't think people should. In my opinion, there's no free lunch in life, right? If I gonna eat 10 chocolate chip cookies, it's probably not the best for me. I would never advise someone to just start vaping because they wanted to. If they so choose to, at the end of the day, that is your choice. That's your right as a, person to do so. Um, but I would never say, hey, yeah, just go and do it because you want to. Um, I think people, yeah, should make their own choices, but I would never endorse someone just going to vape because I want them to.
So do you think it might be unfair, or is it unfair, that public health says they want a nicotine-free world, and here you've built a company around nicotine-free products and still find yourself getting, axed by public health?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of irony in that. I'm trying to do something that I think, and I have, and a lot of anecdotal data to show that, people are finding this quite useful. Like, let me provide products that are lab tested, that are verified, high quality products, and like, let's give this as an option to people that are wanting to stop. Like that should really count for stuff. But a lot of these, organizations, health officials just say no. And I think they're just caught up in a lot of maybe politicization of it, or just they're unknowing about how it really works, or really maybe even they don't spend the time to care about how people actually go about quitting. It's strange. It's strange to me that, if you're smoking for 25 years and they tell you go get a patch, it's, people are itching to, smoke a cigarette just because, that's the habit that they've done for so long. And so I think my solution provides a much better alternative, and at least I think attacks the problem a bit better. But they don't want to listen.
Well, tobacco control and public health are waging a war on nicotine. That's clear. Do you see that as something that's good for your business?
I would like to say yes, but as we've been discussing, I get lumped in with all of this. So, whatever kind of happens to the vaping nicotine tobacco industry really affects my business all the same through the regulation. So much of this legislation now is so broad and so vague that, they can really enforce whatever they want. When, I even on a federal level, like I'm not a nicotine product. They just say that I am, and that's kind of, I'm at their whim and I'm at their mercy.
Have you ever found yourself having to defend nicotine vaping in order to defend your products?
Trying to think. Yeah, I mean, there's been people, just kind of out. It's like, oh, like why would you do that? I'm like, and it kind of like it turns into a talking about like what vaping is and why people will do it and why it is a better alternative to smoking. And like, people at the end of the day, if they want to consume nicotine and they want to vape it, like, do it by all means. So I think a lot of it comes from people just not understanding what it is, how it works. People say, oh, there's like, all these bad chemicals in there. It's like maybe 20 years ago when people were just starting out with this, they didn't really know what they were putting together. But now it's a lot of the chemicals or really the ingredients that go in there are rather inert. They just provide flavorings, propylene glycol, and vegetable glycerin. Um, but I mean, I do find myself like defending what the industry is making and what they're trying to do a lot, and to certain areas that people aren't familiar with it. So, granted, I'm not making a nicotine product, but I still, am try to be educational and or educative to people that aren't knowing about it or don't understand the nuance of it.
Does the public in general understand the difference between nicotine-free vapes and nic vapes?
It is getting better, but I would still like. Granted, and I am speaking through the lens of a lot of people that I just interact with on a large scale in relation to my businesses at these trade shows. So take this temperature gauge is with a grain of salt. That is still quite uh, they're skeptical of it or they're not knowing what it is. But that's grown quite a bit, and so maybe the general public is probably 3-4 years behind what I would call like the general industry knowers. So it's still probably quite behind on general public, sadly.
Conrad, you've got the opportunity today on RegWatch to speak to thousands of nicotine vapors and tobacco harm reduction advocates. What message, if any, do you have for them about nicotine-free vapes?
Um, I would say, if you're ever looking to, stop vaping, to reduce your nicotine usage, nicotine free is a great alternative. Now, is it for everyone? Absolutely not. Some people do really well with just putting the device down and walking away. If you're one of those persons that really misses the aspect of, puffing something, enjoying the flavor, this could be a great alternative or product for you. Even if you're not looking to quit, there's people that have just used a nicotine-free device just to kind of supplement, their normal vaping routine. People have asked me like, oh, why don't you make, a zero or a one, a two, a three, and many, many years ago we had like right before the PMTA came out, we actually had a taper kit. And that was a product that we looked at doing, but I think it was a little too early of a product to put out there. People, I don't think quite understood necessarily like what a 5% nicotine disposable was. Like what even was that? Like how strong is that? But I think now maybe the market would be more amenable to it, but there's a lot of regulation and a lot of legislation that really prevents one of these products, funny enough, from getting into the market, which could help people, which is another really ironic thing. They're trying to help people quit, but don't want people to quit. Uh, so yeah, I mean, I think a taper solution, it actually could be quite effective for people, but kind of going back to the regulation side, it's really, really difficult to get something going without millions of dollars or lobbyists in your pocket.
But you're still fighting on.
Yeah, I mean, you got to. There's always another day and a new battle to fight. I don't think vaping is going to go anywhere. I think there's going to be some give and take with the industry, and some regulation can be beneficial for ensuring that it's a high quality product, but there's definitely a lot of regulation that's just total garbage and just making one small business operations really difficult, and not giving the ability for smaller companies to grow and rise, that may provide a much better product and experience for against the incumbents. So, going to keep trying, going to keep pushing, and going to do our best.